this explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking a text that, let's be honest, a lot of people just skip right over. They kind of assume it's just this ancient ledger of head counts and dry laws. But I'm here to tell you the Book of Numbers is absolutely far more than that. It is actually the ultimate survival guide for life's waiting periods.
So, let me ask you, have you ever felt like you're literally just wandering in circles? Like the journey to your dream is just dragging on endlessly, leaving you frustrated, feeling totally stuck, or wondering, why is this taking so long? If you've ever found yourself in that kind of holding pattern, you are definitely in the right place. Because the Book of Numbers holds the answers to why we face these detours and exactly how to navigate the wilderness seasons of our own lives.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of this massive 40-year history, we're breaking it down into 5 key parts. 1. The wilderness crucible. 2. Order amidst the chaos. 3. The cost of rebellion. 4. Grace in the desert. And finally, shadows of the gospel. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Wilderness Crucible, Shaping an Unholy People. You know, this wilderness wasn't just some geographical detour, right? It was a literal and metaphorical training ground to shape former slaves into a holy nation. The sheer scale of this delay is honestly staggering. By year 1, they're at Mount Sinai receiving the law. By year 2, they're right on the very edge of the Promised Land at a place called Kadesh Barnea. But then, there's a massive 38-year gap before they finally reach the plains of Moab in year 40. That immense gap represents an entire lifetime of wandering, and it was all caused by a tragic failure to trust God's plan.
Which brings us to part 2. Order amidst the chaos. God's divine design. The physical layout of their camp is actually super fascinating because it reveals God's ultimate priorities. It wasn't just logistical, it was deeply symbolic. The tabernacle, God's dwelling place, sits right at the absolute center of the entire camp. Then the Levites surround it as caretakers, and the 12 tribes are positioned systematically outward from there. Plus, there were these strict purity laws demanding both collective and personal holiness. Literally everything revolved around God's presence. It really challenges us to ask ourselves, in the layout of our own lives, does God truly hold that central place? And the way they knew when to move is just incredible. A cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night rested over the tabernacle, guiding their every single step. If the cloud lifted, they packed up and marched, no questions asked. If it stayed put for months, well, they stayed put for months. What an absolute masterclass in surrendering personal plans to divine timing. It demanded total patience and unshakable trust in God's schedule, rather than their own.
But, well, humans are humans, right? That leads us to part 3, the cost of rebellion, entitlement, jealousy, and fear. This human tendency eventually builds into the ultimate crisis point. 10 verses 2. When 12 spies were sent into the Promised Land to scout it out, 10 came back absolutely terrified of the Canaanite giants, completely ignoring all of God's promises. They sowed this paralyzing fear throughout the entire camp. But 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, showed this unshakable, incredible faith. Listen to Caleb's bold declaration. He said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Talk about incredible energy, right? Caleb's bold faith acts as a direct foil to the toxic groupthink and negativity that had infected the rest of the camp. He didn't deny the giants were there. He just knew for sure his God was bigger. But here's the thing. The fear of those 10 spies wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of this cascading chain of rebellion. The Israelites constantly romanticized their past slavery in Egypt when everything's got tough. They complained for meat, which led to a devastating plague at the ironically named Graves of Craving. Miriam and Aaron's jealousy over Moses brought temporary leprosy. Korah's prideful rebellion literally ended with the earth opening up and swallowing 250 men. No way, right? And even Moses, carrying the immense weight of leadership, struck a rock in anger instead of speaking to it. Tragically, that mistake cost him his own entry into the Promised Land. So the crucial point is this: unchecked desires and disobedience always carry a devastating cost, even for great leaders. The book actually features 2 major censuses, and they highlight a stark, tragic cost. The first census counted the generation of rebellion, the very people who, because of their fear and disobedience, died wandering in the wilderness. But the second census, taken nearly 40 years later, counted the generation of hope. These were the children who finally stepped into the Promised Land. It really demonstrates the steep cost of their delay, yet it's this beautiful proof that God's plans ultimately prevailed with a brand new generation.
Which brings us to part 4, Grace in the Desert, Life Amidst Judgment.
Because despite the heavy judgments and the brutal harshness of the wilderness, God continuously provided miraculous grace. Like, consider this incredible event. After Korah's rebellion, the people were still grumbling about who should actually lead. So God had the leaders of each tribe place their wooden staffs in the tabernacle. And overnight, Aaron's staff didn't just sprout. It blossomed and produced fully ripe almonds, a totally dead piece of wood brought back to life. This completely silenced the rebels and proved once and for all that true spiritual leadership is appointed by God and marked by life and fruitfulness.
Also, consider how God handled the complexities of justice in such a harsh era. He established cities of refuge. Basically, these were 6 strategically placed sanctuary cities for anyone who committed unintentional manslaughter. It perfectly balanced the brutal justice of the ancient world with divine mercy, preventing these endless bloody cycles of vengeance. It was a physical, real-world demonstration of God's heart for a second chance. And speaking of justice, we have the incredibly inspiring story of Zelophehad's daughters. In a deeply patriarchal society where land was traditionally only passed down to sons, these 5 sisters boldly stepped up to Moses and asked for their father's inheritance so his name wouldn't be erased. And guess what? God agreed with them. They literally altered Israel's inheritance laws forever. This powerful moment proves that God's justice absolutely transcends human traditions and that no individual is ever overlooked in his kingdom.
Then there's the absolute irony of a guy named Balaam. A foreign king literally hired this pagan prophet to curse the Israelites. But every single time Balaam opened his mouth, God forced him to bless them instead. He even delivered this profound truth, saying, God is not human, that he should lie. Does he promise and not fulfill? It just goes to show that no human scheme, not even a hired curse, can thwart God's absolute sovereignty.
Finally, Part 5, Shadows of the Gospel, Jesus in the Book of Numbers. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate payoff of the whole book.
Beneath all the censuses and the wandering, the Book of Numbers is an intricate, masterfully woven precursor to the Christian gospel. It's amazing how the physical provisions in the wilderness directly foreshadowed spiritual salvations found in the New Testament. For instance, when the people were dying from fiery snake bites, Moses lifted a bronze serpent on a pole, and anyone who looked at it lived. That's a direct shadow of Christ lifted on the cross. The rock that Moses struck poured out water for a thirsty nation, pointing directly to Christ as the living water. And those cities of refuge we just talked about, they're a stunning preview of Christ as our eternal sanctuary, a safe haven from judgment.
So, what does this all mean for us today? What you should take away from this for your own daily life is exactly what the Israelites had to learn the hard way. First, trust God fully during your seasons of uncertainty. The waiting isn't wasted, it's preparation. Second, practice gratitude instead of constantly complaining about your present situation. Third, honor and follow faithful, God-appointed leadership rather than sowing division. And finally, pass the baton of faith to the next generation. Your faithfulness today shapes their tomorrow.
We all face our own wilderness seasons, right? Times of waiting, testing, and really difficult transitions. The Book of Numbers shows us exactly what's at stake. So, I'll leave you with this question. Will you trust God to lead you through your wilderness, or will you let fear dictate your destiny? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.